Good to go. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 9:01. And Amber, would you kindly take attendance?
Yes, thank you, Fran. Eva Bermuda Zimmerman.
Present.
Isha Canada.
Present.
Adrian will not be joining us this morning. Britt Marie Cole Johnson. Is Britt Marie with us this morning yet?
I don't see her.
I do not believe she's joined us yet. Carol Dzinski.
Present.
Michelle Gilman.
Present.
Sheila Hummel. I do not believe Sheila has joined us yet. Is Sheila with us?
Don't see Sheila.
Sheila has not joined us yet.
I'm sorry, I just joined.
Oh,
Good morning,
Thank you.
Sheila.
Sorry, but thank you. Yep, good morning.
Sal Luciano has not joined us yet this morning. Alex has not joined us. Fran Pastori.
here.
Paul Patamianos.
Here, good morning.
Good morning, John. Scott.
Here.
Mike Soltis.
Here.
Molly Weston Williamson.
Here.
And Justin Zartman.
Present.
Thank you, Fran. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you, Amber. I don't see any legislators joining us today, but I would like to acknowledge members of the public that are in attendance. Thank you for being here today. First order of business, I would like to ask the board to review the minutes of February 10th. And may I have a motion to approve?
Motion approved, Daryl.
A second?
Second it, Sheila.
Thanks, Sheila. Any abstentions?
Mike abstains.
Yeah, this is Paul Patamias. I'm going to abstain from voting because I wasn't present for the meeting.
Same for me, Fran. Abstentions. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Actually, Fran, you didn't ask if anyone approved.
May I have a motion to approve?
No,
Thank
you
you.
got the
All
motion.
those in
but you
favor?
didn't-
Okay, the motion is approved. Yes?
Just
You have to ask them to say
them
aye
vote.
still.
Okay, just say aye if you've approved the motion.
Okay,
All
I
in
approve.
favor, aye.
Okay, very good.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Okay, third item on the agenda is updates regarding proposed policies and private plan audit process. Erin and Michael, would you please provide the updates on the proposed policies and private plan process?
And Michael, you'll go first.
Good morning, everybody. We just want to take this opportunity to provide a hopefully brief snapshot of where we are with respect to policy drafting for various topics. We have a few different groupings of policies that are at various points in the process. So this is sort of just a status check of where things stand today. The first category is leftovers from 2021. As the board may remember, we had two policy decisions that were initially drafted in 2021 and which we tabled in order to have further conversations and to research a bit more before we had final adoption, both involving what happens to active paid leave requests when there are certain changes to the underlying paid leave program. One topic was the minimum wage, and the board adopted that policy last month, so that's all set. The other topic was transitions between private plans and public plans. In other words, an employee files a paid leave request with one plan. While that leave is ongoing, their underlying plan changes from private to public or public to private. What happens to that claim? We still have a little bit more work to do on the holistic policy, but the calendar is sort of forcing our hand to make a decision about all the private plans that are going to go live on April 1st. So at least for as far as that group is concerned, we do have a decision that we're going to say any claims that are active under the public program and that employer moves to the private plan, they would terminate with the public plan and be able to be refiled with the private plan. In addition to that, the new private plan, the employers, both for this category of claims and for any other claims that were filed on the public plan that maybe ended earlier, the employer can decide whether or not they want to reduce the paid leave allowance, the kind of 12 weeks under the private plan, by utilization of the public plan. Or they can alternatively just give every employee a fresh 12 weeks allowance on the private plan. That'll be a decision that employers can make. And if they have a paid leave administrator, then it's a conversation between the employer and that administrator. So that's kind of decision for these private plans that are going live April 1st. We still are continuing to work on the full policy, both what happens long-term, as well as the sort of opposite scenario, what happens when there's a transition from a private plan to the public program, and whether that follows the same principle. So that's kind of the leftover from last year that we're still working on. Second category are the policies that were posted last month. The board adopted or voted to post publicly for comments. These are primarily about things like the contributions and penalties related to unpaid contributions, how we handle the unique leave types that require employer approvals in situation where there is no employer to approve it, as well as our internal confidentiality privacy policy for authority employees. Because as everyone knows, we handle a lot of sensitive data. We want to make sure we're using that appropriately at all times. So once that notice period closes this month, we can share with the board any comments and hopefully have final adoption of those policies. Category 3, this is the category of things that we're currently working on. We've been working on for the past month, maybe even longer. So we're hoping to share these with the board shortly. One category we've worked on, one policy set that we worked on with the finance team is related to refund requests. We have one policy for employers and a separate policy for employees. Employers, this typically happens because they miscalculated the amount they should have remitted, or occasionally they've paid twice the same amount, and that's clearly an error. So how do they go about requesting a refund? How does that process work? And as far as individual employees, this typically occurs for the employees who contributed for wages over the Social Security benefit and wage base cap. Most commonly, it's going to happen when they work for multiple employers throughout the course of the year. The employer doesn't know how much they earned with other employers, so they keep withholding contributions. They don't stop at the Social Security benefit and wage base cap. So how does an employee request that refund? Second category of policies we're currently working on, it's also related to the Social Security cap. It's how wages apply when an employee works for both a private plan employer and a public employer during the year, whether at the same time or transition, and sort of how do we figure out what wages apply to that cap under both programs. So we're drafting a policy for that as well. Third policy that we're still working on, also sort of related to Social Security, involves employees who are receiving federal or state benefits while they are currently working and contributing to the program, and what happens if they continue to receive those benefits from that time until they maybe have a request for paid leave benefits. Does that reduce their amount or make them ineligible for benefits? And as an example, if an employee is receiving Social Security, either retirement or disability, and is working at the same time, part-time, because that Social Security check is not enough, and that part-time work is for an employer participating in the program, they're contributing their earnings to the program, and should they be ineligible for benefits because they continue to receive Social Security, that doesn't feel right. So we want to draft a policy to kind of allow them to continue to receive, and what are the parameters of that scenario where we would allow them to do both. So those are kind of the topics we're still working on. We hopefully will have policies for you shortly. And then kind of there's a fourth category that I'm hopefully I can turn over to Aaron about the audits, particularly with respect to private plans. So Aaron, do you want to share about that?
Sure. So with the private plans, Michael, Amber, and I have been working to develop the standards and policies for when we start auditing the approved private plans. The audits, we've identified 4 categories. And so with any private plan, we could audit them on one or all of the following: compliance with the application requirements, particularly with regard to the employee vote and providing the plain language guide and making sure the vote was not coercive. 2, compliance with the requirements relating to contributions in terms of making sure they don't require the employees to contribute more than what we would require, making sure that the funds are kept separate and not commingled with other funds or used for any, so not commingled in terms of where they're kept And then also to make sure that they're not used for any purposes that are not permitted under our policies. The third area is compliance with the claims management. So we do require private plans to follow our claims management policies. We want to make sure that the employees of private plan employers are getting the benefits that they would otherwise be entitled to. And then fourth is really on the financial solvency. With regard to the financial solvency, if it's a fully insured product, the Department of Insurance has already vetted the carriers and the policy forms. So we're going to be relying on the Department of Insurance for those fully insured products. But we do have about something under 6 self-insured plans. So we're developing standards to make sure that those self-insured plans have the funds necessary to make sure that their employees get those benefits. We've been working with the Department of Insurance, which has been a great partner. We've also reached out to other states and had a really helpful meeting with Washington yesterday. Our goal is to develop a draft, basically, and then do sort of the equivalent of a dress rehearsal with some volunteer private plan employers so we can road test what we're thinking, make sure that it comports to kind of reality, and then come back, finalize that draft, and bring it to the board for public posting. So that's the goal. We are working as quickly as we can because we do consider this to be a priority, but we also have learned from other states that it's a little bit tricky to make sure it's done, and we want to make sure they're done well. So we're just trying to make sure we kind of think through all the issues before we come to you with a approved plan, but we're working hard on it. That's kind of where we are on the policy and audit development. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them.
And thanks so much. It sounds like a lot of really great work is going on. I have 2 questions. So first, on the audit stuff, that all sounds very sensible. I wanted to ask, you mentioned sort of 4 specific categories that can trigger audits, all of which make total sense. Are you also contemplating doing some number of random audits?
Yeah, so when I was saying the 4 audits, those are the areas in which we would audit.
Oh, that's what the audit is
So
checking for.
the trigger can be random, could be based on complaints. We are working with Department of Labor to be able to get reports about any appeals that are filed against private plans. Not that we're not going to get granular level information from DOL, but if we see a private plan that's getting an untoward number of appeals, that could also trigger an audit. And I think I said this already, but I'll say it again: random audits are definitely on the menu for triggering an audit.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. I misunderstood, but that makes all of those things seem like very sensible reasons to look for an audit. So thank you for that. And then my other question it's one of, I think, the first categories you mentioned. So where a worker has an active claim and through the public plan, and that their employer moves to a private plan. I think what I heard you say is that the active claim will terminate and then the worker has to reapply to the private plan.
Yes.
Do all the timelines restart? So like, does the worker have to resubmit the full claim and then wait again for approval?
I mean, it will be up to the private plan. We'll still have to administer that claim. Hopefully it would be faster. The employee can choose to like download the forms they gave us, and maybe that'll help utilize. They can give them to the private plan employer. They already have the med certification from us. There may be ways to expedite it, but ultimately the private plan would have to administer that claim.
Part of, well, certainly for this first tranche of the entities that started with a public plan but have a private plan that's going to take effect on April 1st, we've done an initial assessment of whether there's going to be any existing claims that carry forward, and it's in the single digits. We're going to do another assessment as we get closer. We've already flagged this for the insurers, and we'll be developing notices to go to the employee and the employer with sort of, as Michael said, that reminder that, hey, all this documentation is already available to you, employee. So, let's make this as easy as possible. The thing that's tricky is an employee, particularly if they're duly employed, and they've got one public plan employer and one private plan employer, or two private plan employers, they may need to do a new eligibility assessment, because if the wages that allow them to be eligible for the public plan are with primarily one employer and not the other, that new employer is entitled to do a new eligibility assessment. And they may need to, again, with a dual employee, there may need to be an assessment, an adjustment of the benefits, because if they're staying with us, we will kind of recalculate excluding the private plan wages, and the private plan employer is going to have to recalculate based on their own wages. So, you know, there's sort of no way around kind of doing that initial kind of work. So that's why we're making sure everyone is aware of it and trying to provide that notice to both the employees and employers about what to expect.
Got it. So did I hear correctly? It sounded like on the many complicated questions around dual employment, that's something in the bucket of things that you're still working on proposals around. Is that right?
Well, with dual employment, the dual employment causes the difficulty, because the board had already approved in both the original private plan policies and in the one approved in November, that private plan employers are entitled to look only at the private plan wages to determine eligibility. So the reason it gets complicated here is that it might be eligible for us based on their other wages, but may not be eligible for that private plan employer. So they wouldn't, if they stay with us for employer A and private plan employer is employer B, they'll still get our benefits, but adjusted. And then the private plan employer has to figure out if they're eligible for those benefits and what that is.
Got it. Well, I appreciate hearing you say that it's a very small number of claims.
Yes.
That we hit by this, and also that there's active work being done to facilitate that. Thank you.
Right. And of that small number of claims, we have, at this point in time, no reason to believe that we've got that dual employment situation. So it doesn't look like it's a very likely problem. It's just one of the many complicated issues associated with that transition. Mike?
Good morning, Aaron. So putting aside the complication of the dual employment for the moment, is it feasible to require that as a condition of a private plan that the plan continue the claims that had been approved under the public plan so that an employee does not need to reapply again?
We've explored that. It's very difficult. And part of the difficulty is just the mechanics of getting a claim into an insured system. So there's some mechanics of having to get them set up in the new system that is necessary. We are not in a position to just do what in the insurance world I've learned is called a history and takeover, where we bundle everybody up and just hand it over to the other entity. That's incredibly complicated. And even single employer policy from one insurer to the other, it usually requires a significant amount of time and effort and isn't always done very well. So it's not something we can do. We've tried to figure out ways to minimize the burden on the employees, but sort of no matter kind of what permutation we've explored, it always ends up with the employee having to provide some new documentation to the employer because they haven't seen those claim files yet.
So, Mike, we think that in many cases, I think as Michael said earlier, they can use the same documents because they already have well, they don't really need the employer verification, but because that's what we use, but they already have the medical certification, you know, or the adoption certificate or whatever else it is that they need. And in some instances, if employees follow our advice, they've already filed their FMLA paperwork with their employer. So in many instances, the employer already has lots of what they already need. And then they've just taken that documentation and brought it to the paid leave authority. So when we thought about it that way, it turns out that the employee, although it isn't as ideal as we would like, that the employee has to reapply, really the information that they have to provide, their employer probably already has it. So then it's just a matter of giving it to them and then having them have a quick turnaround. And then also emphasizing to employers that this can't take weeks and weeks, right? You've essentially have a 5-day window. I mean, I understand, especially when you are dealing with an influx of claims as we are, it can take it can take a much longer period of time than you anticipate. But we really did try to think of all of the ways that we can minimize the burden on employees. And this was really the way that we can do it. And we did fully explore I can't remember the term either, but really sort of the bundling up of everything in the history and sending it over. The problem is that it has the data has to looks different for every single employer, which really makes it impossible to do and do well. So that's how we find ourselves in this place right now.
Eva, I
Yeah,
apologize. I didn't notice you had your hand up for such a long time.
Yeah, Eva had her hand up. Yeah.
I went from having questions to just concerns and now comments. At first when I was hearing the onus being on the employee, I was concerned that yes, right now we might not have an influx or a high influx of employees in that scenario, but we should always prepare for a future where it's unknown and there might be a lot more in the situation, right?
Mhm.
But it sounds to me, Andrea, from what you're explaining, the difficulty and what and Aaron explained, that there is no near future where all of the paperwork will be consolidated. That's probably never going to happen, right? So Aaron's shaking her head.
That's right.
In I guess the way to mitigate that, right, since we can't fix it, technological problems that don't allow us to do that, is what do we have in mind for social media outreach communications to clarify for that subset that right now is small and might grow?
Yeah.
So right now we're focusing on the actual individuals. It's a little bit tricky to do sort of a bigger, broader brush because we don't want to confuse people.
Exactly.
We're so focused on getting everyone to give us the right information for their existing claims. And this is such a tiny subset. We don't want to kind of dilute that message. So our plan is, as I said, we've already flagged this for the insurers that are involved. We've identified the employers and the employees. And so we want to communicate with them directly so that they have a very specific, hey, this is you, and this is what you personally will need to do. And I think certainly for this go round, we'll be able to do that because it's such a small number. I think as we see it in the future, I think we can create more kind of employee and employer guides as to when you're transitioning from public to private or private to public, this is what you can expect. We just haven't really made that a focus of our larger campaign because we just don't want to confuse people right now.
I mean, it also sounds like because it's such a small number right now, it's somewhat negligible and you can deal with it on a case-by-case basis until you get to that point. But
Right.
but you have to prepare to get there. Got it.
Right.
We could add to the materials that we give to the employer a section specifically on this. And if the employer comes across a situation that they didn't expect that is this, then that communication at least is there that they're aware of. I remember in my days before labor organizing and working at Chili's, As a manager, I was the person having that conversation on FMLA and what the expectations are. I'm sure most employers, most responsible employers, HR, they have designated people who have this conversation. So if we at least make the effort to direct the employer to the right information, that's one pathway of clarity for the employee.
That's a really
Right.
great suggestion.
Yeah. Mike, did we finish answering the questions that you had?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Eva, did you have any other questions? Okay, you're good. All right.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Molly has her hand
Molly?
raised.
Molly.
I think Ava's suggestion is an excellent. I should have a clarifying question, which Aaron reminded me of. So in that scenario where a worker is transitioning with the same employer, public plan to private plan, Aaron reminded us that the CTFMLA claim isn't affected by that. So that's already been processed, however it is, the worker is eligible for whatever they're eligible for. So in that scenario, what we're really talking about is they have to get reapproved for the money, but
Right.
the time off from work is not affected by that.
That's
Exactly.
right. That's exactly right.
Essentially, in a worst case scenario, we're dealing with workers get delayed in getting paid, which is a problem that we should and are working to solve. But
Mhm.
it's helpful. It was helpful to me to be reminded of that piece. And I think that's a relevant piece, and also probably a useful thing to like notify workers at, like to make sure that that is transmitted, that you don't have to reapply, since we know all the different things that have very similar names is very confusing generally.
Mhm.
Right. I think we can make sure we put that in certainly our communication for this tranche, and then also the broader communication is your FMLA. That's not affected. And as Andrea pointed out, employers should already have most of the documentation they'd need, and already have, certainly from public to private, we're going from less information to more information. The employers already know the wages. They already know who the person is. They don't have the same fraud issues that we have. They don't need to worry about schedule or employer verification because it's their employer. So that actually should be relatively easy, and we can kind of make sure our communications point that out to both sides so that they don't freak out, which is the goal.
Anyone
Any other
else?
questions about the policies or audits? Alrighty, great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll have an update on the actuarial RFP. Locke?
Thank you, Fran. Morning, everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we wanted to spend some time today and update you on the status of the actuarial services. Our statutes require that the authority put out an RFP every 3 years for professional services. And as you may know, our contract with the Institute of Women's Policy Research and WildFig Partners expired last September. So knowing this, the authority put out 2 attempts last year, but unfortunately no responses were received. This time, we posted it along with placing advertisements in the Hartford Business Journal, the New Haven Biz, and along with social media platforms. And we ended up receiving 4 proposals. So the scope of work is going to shift from researching other paid leave entities around the country, preparing to launch our program, to now monitoring the performance of the trust fund now that the benefits are being paid out. We'll continue to receive a 5-year projection of the trust fund on an annual basis and have a periodic reporting of the trust fund performance by examining our quarterly contributions coming in and having our actuarial firm work with our TPA to review the benefit payments being made out. Lastly, I wanted to add that there is an actuarial aspect to the private plans discussion that Aaron and Michael just touched on, presented earlier. And we'll need to continue to monitor the impact of the private plans population, what that has against the whole solvency of the fund. Let's see, next slide. And this is a timeline of the status of where we are with recruitment of our actuarial services. In February, we posted the RFP. We received questions from 3 firms and ended up with 4 proposals. Interviews were conducted earlier this week by the RFP committee, comprised of Andrea, Aaron, Dave, and myself. Members of the Finance and Audit Committee did express interest in participating, so thank you. But unfortunately, based on the timeline and due to scheduling conflicts, they were unable to participate Next, we are reconvening for a scoring and reviewing session tomorrow, where the committee will come to a recommendation to present to the FAC March 24th. That recommendation would carry to the board for April 14th, where we'll seek a vote. We anticipate services to begin June 1st and to kick off a 3-year relationship with a reputable actuarial firm. So things are moving. Does anybody have any questions on this timeline or RFP?
No, like, this is not to suggest the one we've been using is not reputable. It is.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. I'm just
okay. All right. Okay. Eva, so your hand is up.
I just want to give a little bit of comfort for people who are seeing this and listening to this maybe out of context, that the RFP timeline and actual timeline does not affect the current numbers that and projections that we've submitted in previous meetings. So we're not in jeopardy of anything right now.
No, thank you for that. No, this is the continual monitoring of the fund. That's what this is, because the contract, as Locke had said, had expired. But I think what's also important to know is that before that contract expired, that actuarial firm actually did provide us with a tool that we can use that can update the inflow and outflow of funds in real time, so that we can actually manage that as compared to the analysis that they've given us, so that we can know where we are in payments that we've made as compared to the analyses and the projections. So we have a tool. It isn't as if monitoring is not happening right now. It is. We would just like to have an actuarial firm do not just that, but obviously more significant work as well. Yeah, none of us, can do this. That's why you need
Thanks,
a firm.
Andrea.
You're welcome. Molly.
Yeah, I just had a thank you for that. That's all very helpful. And thank you, Eva, for that clarification. I think that's always useful. I just want to, it sounds like the hope is that whoever we end up hiring begins work on June 1st, 2022. And the hope is that that's a 3-year contract. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? All right, so that concludes the actuarial update.
Thank you, Locke. And we are moving on to item 5. Locke, you're up again with Walter. Would you kindly provide an update on the fund recovery?
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen again. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So today, Walter, our contribution compliance manager, would like to provide an update on the fund recovery process. The fund recovery is an important aspect to maintain the solvency of the fund. While the authority wasn't designed to be a collections agency, we recognize that this is important. We're taking steps to help ensure mandatory employee contributions are remitted by employers and they make their way to the plan. Last month, Michael Cesar from our legal counsel presented refinements to the policies surrounding compliance that was both fair to the employer and administratable by the paid leave authority. The refinement of the policies allowed for us to have a better picture of what the employers might expect if they unfortunately find themselves on the non-compliant side. So here, this little timeline illustrates that the due date is the calendar end date. This is where the starting point of the 1% non-compounding interest begins. The grace period ends the last business day of the following month, which is when we get the lion's share of contributions. For penalties, we've adopted a DOL approach where we send out a penalty to assess as soon as the grace period is over to encourage employers to report on their own while we start estimating invoices. So after this encouragement phase passes, an estimated invoice on our end is created and communicated to the employer for 2 months. That amount after 2 months, we transferred over to a third-party collection vendor to allow them to do what they're good at and fully equipped to do, since the paid leave authority has exhausted all efforts on the collection front. This is our timeline. So before I pass it off to Walter, does anybody have any questions with the timeline and approach to employers?
I just had a clarifying question on the timeline. So just to make sure I'm understanding right, it sounds like officially contributions are due the last day of the calendar quarter, but just like recognizing realistically, no one, like people are generally not going to be ready to do that immediately. We have this sort of 1 month-ish grace period so that employers effectively have a month to not be breaking the law, not be accruing interest, to remit, and it's only there's sort of the official due date, and then there's penalties don't start until that 1 month later. Is that about right?
That's absolutely correct, Molly.
Got it. That makes complete sense. Thanks.
All right, so I don't see any hands. So next I'll hand it over to Walter to talk about statistics and outreach efforts around our fund recovery.
Thank you, Locke, and good morning, everyone. Now that Locke has talked about our fund recovery projections, we thought it necessary to also discuss some of the quantitative numbers that we've seen through our 4 quarters of reporting so far. So this slide is a resemblance of those employers by number. We currently have 5,581 employers who are registered by a batch TPA that haven't remitted payments currently. We also have an additional 2,674 employers who have registered themselves or have been registered by a third party using our portal that have not yet remitted contributions to us. Those are our current numbers. Focusing on non-compliant payment interval reports or partial payments, we can see that we have in Q2 561 open quarters or non-remitted quarters, open periods of reporting due. Q3 we have 429 and Q4 160. So from here we can see that the quantity of missed quarter payments periods has gone down from quarter to quarter. As we reach out to these employers and follow up on those items that are due and sift through our data, we are identifying the following scenarios. Possibly self-made reporting period errors where the employers are going into our portal and remitting a payment for a quarter, but they have a gap between the previous quarter and the next quarter of a day or more, causing a missed payment interval. We are working with those employers to fix those reporting errors. We also have the possibility of missed whole quarters or skipped contribution payments. So those are the items that we are following up on first to make sure that everyone is compliant and reporting their whole quarterly contribution due. From there, we are focusing on outreach. A large portion of our initial outreach has been built around just contacting TPAs directly. From TPAs, we're hoping to get a broader path of reaching out to the employers, as a majority of our employers are represented by TPAs. Both our Kinetic paid leave staff and our United Way Contact Center reached out to TPAs, focusing on registered employers that haven't submitted contributions, reports reflecting underpayments of contributions, reports breaking down the returns that haven't been submitted for an employer, or those that have been submitted but no contribution has been remitted on behalf of that return. And through that outreach, we are identifying also the following scenarios. Additional contributions due to us. So we're working with a TPA and employer to ensure those are submitted to us. Different registration and enrollment file issues that we're working and coaching with those TPAs and employers to update their registration records with us. And then return and payment filing errors where inconsistent information is being submitted to us, not associating a payment and a return on a TPA level that we're having to focus and fix ourselves through the soon-to-come amendment process. We have also been following up on a number of payment failure issues where employers have gone into our portal, remitted payments that have subsequently failed. We have identified 1,271 failed payments, and we have recouped all but 156 of those and reprocessed in our system. So in the next few weeks, we plan to do continued outreach. We're working with our IT team to validate the best course of action using either the bulk email system through our contribution system or the DAS print shop to focus on sending a mailer out to those employers directly. So we'll be utilizing bulk email capability to follow up with those individual employers where we have an email address on file. When we don't have an email address on file, or if we have subsequently made multiple attempts to reach out to those employers and they have not gotten back to us, we will be utilizing the DAS print shop to send out those mailers. And this will provide us a direct contact point with that individual employer represented by a TPA, so that we can also continue to update our system with their registered information to get their email address on file, which will assist with us through the next step of our collection process. That concludes my presentation, but if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Yeah. Hi, it's Paul Potamianos. I have a quick question for you, Walter. On your outreach efforts, what proportion of those entities or employers that have registered but have not made payments were you successful in reaching out to? What sort of contacts have you made over the past, and what's the plan for how you're going to work through this rather extensive list of employers who don't appear to be compliant?
Okay, so we're currently kind of limited by our system at this time. So we're focusing on that bigger batch pool, that TPA represented employer. We are able to, I don't have a percentage, but we have recouped a number of items. We are also working with them to identify, I would say of those 5581, most likely about a quarter are registered in error or closed businesses that the TPA still opened with us. We are sorting through our DLL information to be able to update our system with that as well. But we have made a huge growth, I would say, over the last 2 quarters in that outreach. I know that ADP is sending payments to us for past quarters, as well as paychecks and Paylocity.
Thanks. I guess I still don't have a good sense of what portion of this population still needs to be contacted.
Oh, here's what I will tell you, that probably in September, October, maybe a little earlier than that, we had about 22,000 employers who we knew should have been registered and paying and weren't. So over the last year, I would say we've sent out a lot of mail, basically postcards saying to them, you need to register and you need to pay. And this really is the most persistent group right now that we're dealing with. So we did really narrow it down from about 22, then we were at 19, then we were at 17, and then we're where we are right now. So the outreach happens discreetly. I think that's probably why we're being a little hesitant, because we don't ever want to accuse an employer of not having participated when they're either no longer a going concern, which is very sensitive to people. So we've had a few of those conversations, at least I have, and they're not great. Or they have mostly they have a philosophical difference with the program, and then they're not participating. And those are the ones that Walter and his team are really dealing with. So we write to them, we send them postcards, we email them, we call them, we send them out, and we send emails in big batches to this 5,500, mostly because we know that those are the ones that have TPAs and it's easier to find them. The ones that are in the 2,600 category, they register online. Some of them have emails, some of them don't. So we spend time actually Googling them and trying to figure out how we get in touch with them. I think what Walter's saying to you is that we're a small team. So we are actually using every outreach avenue that we have that respects the fact that this is still a very challenging time for businesses. But we also know that 130,000 businesses have registered and paid. So we are expecting a greater degree of compliance. So I don't know if that helps to give some more clarity.
It does. I'll probably follow up with you offline, but
Okay.
I would like to have a little bit better understanding of particularly those where you say there's a philosophical difference with what the law requires and what our options are for going down that avenue.
Yeah, the options are what Walter and Lot just provided, which is that we're probably going to end up sending them to a fund recovery organization. That's the option. But before we do that, we really want to make sure we've made every effort to try to collect that without that. We understand, we do understand that some people just don't want to do this, but that it's the law, which is really what we're saying to them. We get it, it's the law. We understand, we want to work with you, but if you're not going to be cooperative in this space, despite the many efforts that we've made, that's why we had this. That's why Walter and Locke, and I have to give them enormous amounts of credit, have put hours and hours and hours of time into figuring out the right way to give those that are non-compliant appropriate notice, and then let them know they will be going to a fund recovery agency, and then the consequences of that are what they are.
Yeah, I appreciate the deference you're giving to those employers who may be uninformed about the program or the requirements. As I said, it's those who you've been in touch with and seem, maybe resistant isn't the right word, but unwilling to comply with what the law requires of them, that I think is trying to get a sense of what that universe looks like.
Yeah, and so are we. So we're continuing to do that because it really means getting in touch with that close to 8,000 employers one by one, and that takes time.
Just as a reminder, we will be imposing penalties come the second quarter. So we haven't done that in the past year, but that is on the table for these resistant employers who are, they need to understand that. And so that's one of the levers we can pull.
All right, thank you. Sorry to belabor the topic.
No, it's fine, Paul. I think it was Molly, then Eva.
Right.
Thank you. I had just two quick questions. So, Erin, you mentioned that thus far you have not been imposing penalties, but will be, or will have the option to do so starting to do. Has interest been being assessed to date?
So that was part of Locke's chart before, which shows when the interest starts to accrue. One of the issues is that the Department of Labor and the Paid Leave Authority have worked to allow for that catch-up period. So we really can't impose penalties while there's a catch-up period still in effect. That catch-up period ends on March 31st. And so then you've got the grace period to get you to the end of April. And if you haven't paid now, although this is an example, the dates are right. People who haven't paid by May 1st are going to start seeing the penalties and the interest.
Got it. So basically, for the completely non-compliant employers who haven't remitted anything, they basically are going to get a total of almost a year and a half where they get no penalties and no interest.
That's right at this point. And that was really, a decision that we made to continue to encourage people to be compliant. And it worked because we went from 22,000 to the number that we have now. And so when there's penalties and interest, we know that employers probably would be less willing to participate. But so now I think we're down to the most resistant group. That's really where we are. And that really was the philosophy, because we're still very sensitive to the fact that we are in a pandemic and businesses are still trying to get themselves up and off the ground. So the idea wasn't to be punitive, but as I said earlier, now that we have 130,000 employers who have registered and paid, this is no longer tolerable. There's just not really a reason why this should be happening anymore.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. And then my other question, which I suspect doesn't have an answer, is it sounds like you got a good sense of the scale of how many employers we're talking about who have either underpaid or completely not paid. Do you have any sense of what the dollar figure is we're talking about that has not been paid or has not been paid on?
Don't know if we do. Locke or Walter, do we have that number yet?
We are working on pulling out those reports, basing it on DOL data for previous periods, but that is still a item that we are working on, and we don't have those final numbers yet.
Yeah.
Right. We just got the recently got the access to the DOL data. So if the employer has registered with DOL, we could certainly get an estimate from that data source.
So we're still working on that.
Yes.
Yeah. I know.
Ava, I think you have your hand up.
I do, and I have multiple questions, or I guess 3 questions here. My first question is there any way for us to determine similarities in those who are non-compliant, similarities in maybe language differences, or maybe just not very clear on their end as the employer end of what's happening here? Is there a barrier in language or understanding the request? The other question I had is there a place or a portal where employees can go on and verify if their employer is compliant? And then I'll put those 2 and then I'll go to my third.
Okay. So I'll start. The first one I have are barriers. There are a couple. Language we haven't really discovered, or language is not one of the barriers that we see that is a challenge with non-compliance. The part of the challenge we have is philosophical. We've definitely have those discussions, right? That I shouldn't have to do this. That's part of the problem. The other one is employers who don't even know they're supposed to be participating, because the definition for employer is so broad. So we do have some employers that are registered. Let's say they go online. They could have one person that works in their home for them. They could have 2 or 3 people, and it's a very small business. And some are laboring under the misconception that this law doesn't apply to them because of their size. And we've had some of those conversations as well. So that's why some of the messaging that's gone out on the postcards that we've mailed has said, this is the definition of employer. You probably need it. You should go in and register so that you can know, and you're behind on your payments. You need to call us or have a conversation with us or reach out to us so you can know what to do. So we're finding that sometimes it has to do with size. Sometimes it has to do with industry. So we find that a lot of what we call the personal care industry, so hair salons, nail salons, and that's where sometimes the language barrier can be an issue as well, because we may have owners of hair salons and nail salons that are not necessarily paying attention to the billboards and some of the other issues, some of the other ways that we reach out. And so until they get the postcard, they don't even realize that they're supposed to be doing this, because it's not necessarily an industry that has a trade association or one place that you can go to and reach everyone. So those are just 2 examples. And right now there is not a place where employees can go to see whether or not their employer is registered. The way that it's working, though, is that and we're asking AFLAC actually to help us with this, that if an employee applies and through their verification process, they find that it's an employer that is not registered, then they provide that information to us. And that's part of what informs some of the information that we have. So we get them to register, and then the next step is to get them to pay.
I wonder, and this is not my third, I do wonder if crowdsourcing that effort makes some sense in the future. If we were to have a part of the portal where we list those employees who are non-compliant, how quickly they'd be compliant by push of their employees.
Yeah, we certainly have considered that. There's a downside to that process.
There is, with putting people on blast on their deficiencies and their duties.
Yeah.
My third question, when it comes to the long-term solution of this problem, and you've exhausted all of the virtual avenues to get there, and you're on the brink of penalties, does it make sense to go a step further and maybe visit some of these employers in person, or are we just going to go ahead and go into the penalty portion? Is there another plan in between what you're doing now and then penalties, or are we just moving forward? So
we're going to move forward. Because from a practical standpoint, given the hundreds of thousands of employers versus the staffing that we have available, it just isn't feasible for us to do that. So we are going to move forward. Our stand-in for those personal visits is the massive amount of communication that we're trying to have between the time that anything that happens monetarily that might be detrimental to that business and an opportunity for them to cure. So we will try everything that we can. That's why you see that timeline is so long before we finally just send it over. And we do get responses from employers say, I didn't know, or I did know and I'm not going to do anything about it. And so that informs us as to what our next step should be.
That makes sense. And also I would add that I was very surprised that when I was on the radio representing the paid leave in Spanish on Spanish radio, the only questions I got were about that. I didn't know. I'm a small business owner. I didn't know that I had to participate. I only have a couple people. So
that's right. That's right. That's right.
So I also came into it thinking it was maybe a language barrier, but it wasn't. It was more, they knew the information was out there. They just truly thought they were exempt.
That's right. That probably is the most common response we get. I didn't think it applied to me. And if that's the case, that's fine. We'll continue to work with you. Yeah. Daryl?
It's so true. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm
Daryl.
sorry, Fran. It's your meeting. I'm sorry.
No,
Please go
not at
ahead.
all. Please, Daryl, go ahead. I'll jump in when Daryl's done.
I just want to, I want to make a statement and a couple of questions. And what we're saying for delinquencies, for a lack of a better term, is really no surprise to me. In my role, it includes overseeing the tax division employers with the unemployment insurance compensation for the state. So this is a startup insurance. You're seeing there's probably lots of confusion, and also employers, there's different caveats on why an employer is not providing a payment, and it might be valid. So it doesn't mean all of these numbers are a problem. I think they just need more data, more research, but it's not a surprise to me. So I'm not alarmed by what you provide. In fact, I think you've done a remarkable job. As you said, 22,000 in the fall down to where you are today. That's incredible progress, positive progress with the minimal staff that you have. So again, I'm not alarmed. But my question to you is, I'm not aware of the actual process. Are employers required on a quarterly basis to report the gross wages, the dollars each employee makes gross, along with the 0.5% and then the contribution amount for each employee? Are you getting gross wages along with the 0.5% amount for each employee, then summed? Is that how that works?
I'm just thinking, because it's been quite some time since I've been that close to the report, and I don't see. Lori, do you know whether or not we get that?
We do not right now. We don't collect it.
Yeah, we don't get the information by employee, Daryl. What we do get is a total amount of wages subject to the 0.5%.
For that employer?
Yes.
Correct.
You get an aggregate amount times 0.5%. This is what is due.
Correct.
Okay. And then if it doesn't add up, it's either an employee might be over the Social Security cap and that type of thing. Okay.
Right.
So that's okay. So that helps. So when you talk about employers that are registered, who may at some point have an employee that would be paying into the program, when they don't provide a quarterly return, you obviously you don't know why, but there might be justification that the employer never had an employee during that period of time. So I'm kind of struggling, because having the employee level gross wages along with the 0.5% and the contribution number, and then doing the sum will help you with your auditing. So I don't know if it's something. I mean, it's something to consider, but while you have the Department of Labor in some cases to look at some of that data, but it would absolutely help you on your tax review and understanding if an employer is in compliance and whatnot, because then you have all the data to do that that review and also help with your statistical information as well. So I guess that piece to me would be a concern if because we don't know why they're not making a payment. It could be justified, you just don't know.
That's right.
Because they're not going to be reporting on a quarterly if there's no contributions to report.
That's right.
Had you add a
I'd
requirement.
actually just like to add in a point. We are looking for them to report 0 if there are no contributions due for that quarter.
Okay, so they can report there. Are you requiring the report none? We call them none, but or the 0, or is that a requirement?
That's
Okay.
right.
So that'll
That's
help.
right.
Okay. All right.
That's right.
I have enough information for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Daryl, I just wanted to add, you're absolutely right. There could be valid reasons. For example, the business could be closed temporarily or otherwise. It could be an active business, but they don't have any employees at this time. Or it could be a national business, but they don't have Connecticut employees or employees otherwise who would be subject to the paid family leave contribution rate. So those could be some reasons why the employees were registered and maybe at the time were eligible, but no longer are, or were erroneously registered by TPA to begin with. So we are whittling down that list and just seeing if there's any, that list isn't just necessarily those who we, definitely have something to contribute. They may have very valid reasons, and we're still in the process of determining if they have a valid reason or not, or if they truly owe a contribution
Right.
to
No,
the authority.
Yeah, I agree. I think your ability at some point to utilize state government data and cross checks queries, if you will simplify that view for you, and then your auditors can take it from there.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. I have a question myself, and it may be stating the obvious. The payroll companies automatically are taking the 0.5% out of, right? So these are the companies that we're talking about presumably do not use payroll companies, correct?
No, not necessarily. No.
Okay.
Yeah, we've found that some payroll companies are registering their employers, but at their employer's instruction, they are not withholding the 0.5%.
Wow.
Right. So we ask them, how are you doing that? Because you're essentially
breaking the law.
Right, exactly. Right. You're essentially assisting this employer in not being compliant with the law. Like we're really at a loss as to how you think that's okay. But that's part of what we're discovering. And it really puts, and the TPAs have told us this, right? It puts them in a very challenging position because that employer is their client, especially if they're a fairly large employer as compared to, because not every TPA is a huge one. Some of them are pretty small. And that client could be a very significant client to them. So they are trying to get them to be minimally compliant by registering, but then trying to not be in a place to put the financial pressure on them to actually collect the 0.5%, because the 0.5% requirement is on the employer and not the TPA. That's the difference in the law. So now it's up to us to go after the employer, which we do directly after we've ascertained from the TPA that the employer has directed them not to be compliant.
Got it. Understood. I have one more question.
Sure.
With regard to the second bullet on the slide, let's see, on Walter's slide, where it says those registered, employers registered via the online portal. Do any of these numbers, I'm going to guess no, but do any of these numbers include single member LLCs or sole props that registered but are not contributing?
Yeah, some of them are. It's not a huge number.
Okay.
Yeah, that 2,600 is probably all of the sole props that have registered. So it's a fraction.
So sole props that have registered but haven't yet contributed. And we've talked, Andrea, you and I, about the multitude of reasons around that, which all have to do with calculating gross wages because they don't take regular salaries, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So and some of them are in that number. Yes.
Okay. All right. And that's pretty much the majority of the population that, I'm in the space dealing with. And a lot of it goes back to what has already been said by multiple people. It's that unbelievably, I find it unbelievably, people just don't know.
They don't think, right.
And I will tell you that you mentioned personal services earlier. I would say that those businesses, I would love to see the industry breakdown here, but I would guess that those businesses, because that's a large portion of our clientele at WBDC, represent a large portion of those numbers that you shared. Maybe, maybe not, but I know from dealing with them that they're dancing as fast as they can, these really small businesses that they may have 1, 2, 3, less than 5 employees. So
Right.
there's a way to get to them. And if we can be helpful, please ask.
Yeah, so I think what we'll take back is Eva's suggestion, because there might be 5 nail salons in New Britain, for example. We're not sending all of our communication in Polish, as an example, right? Or might be other nails. So let's say there's a hair salon that's in Bridgeport, and we're not necessarily sending everything in Spanish either. So there might be places where there are language barriers that we need to go back and revisit.
Is there an industry breakdown, Walter? By chance?
I do not have that at this time, but I think that is something I can certainly work on. Yep.
So I think that would be worth looking at, because it may spark some thoughts and ideas about how to penetrate those particular industries and the people in them.
Yeah.
For example, gender, to Ava's earlier point, cultural or language barriers. And I think that while we don't have a big staff, and we can't be, visiting every one of these businesses, I think we can drill down. We may be able to, depends, drill down a little bit. And I'm not trying to put more work on anybody's plate, but really customize the approach. Perhaps be able to customize the approach by which we address the non-compliance.
I think that makes perfect sense, and that's what we're planning on doing on our next outreach step. So thank you very much, Fran, for that.
Excellent, thank you.
And Eva has a follow-up question.
It's just a comment. Fran, I'd be more than happy to combine forces with you and organize a Zoom as trusted messengers as a last reminder to our early educator groups, the childcare centers, childcare owners, as like one last reminder. This is what we are. This is what you have to do. Please do not be fined, etc. And then the last suggestion I have is if there is funding available for an additional mailer out to businesses, then maybe the consideration of that small subset directly to the partners that they subcontract doing their finances, those TPS, those agencies, to see if maybe that last wake-up call, a red letter notice, you will be fined, might get you to that home stretch.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you for that. Sorry for the suggestion.
Okay, on to the next. Thank you. That was really a robust discussion, and I personally learned so much. So thank you, everyone. Okay, John, the claims administration update. Would you please share that with us?
I will. Thank you, Fran. Good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen.
We can see your screen, John.
Okay, great. Thank you. So claims data, and this is as of 3/8. So these are the total claims on a month-by-month basis that have come in so far. 5,200 in December, the large spike in January with a significant number of COVID claims at the 9,654. February claims have leveled off, as have the March incoming claims. In February, we had the 6,883, and March 2,103, for a total received of 23,849 claims as of March 8th. Okay, and then some breakdown on the claims by the reason they were filed. And again, looking at December, January, February, and then the partial for March through March 8th. So you can see that the employee's own illness or injury is a significant percentage of those claims. And also you can see in January with that large blue line that there was a significant uptick in January. Again, representative of a lot of the COVID claims that came in January. And closely followed by the two other categories here of both pregnancy and bonding, as well as care of a family member. And then off on the table to the right, you can see the other types of claims that are being filed, but certainly at significantly lower numbers. And then the types of claims by the leave type. So continuous is the most significant share of the claims. And looking at those, again, you can see going from 4,800 to about 8,800, and then almost 63, and currently in March about 2,300. And you can see the numbers of intermittent and reduced schedule claims are substantially lower, with reduced schedule being the lowest volume claim. And here we have some demographics. So broken down by age generation, and you can see the largest one here is the Generation Y, followed by Generation X, and then Boomers and Generation Z, and the older generation there, silent generation, is substantially lower than that as well. And broken down by gender, we have male at about 6,900 and female at over 13,000. And then again, the other selections are substantially lower numbers and percentages. So here are the top 10 towns by utilization, and this is cumulative. And I know that Jacqueline probably has some more detailed info for you on this topic, but looking at the total number of claims, and then that's divided into the by 10,000 per 10,000 residents, and looking at the numbers of residents in those towns, and that's where we're coming up with these numbers. And as you can see, the largest one here is Canaan, and then working down the list of the top 10 all the way down to Bristol. But the range here is from 231 claims per 10,000 down to about 96 per 10,000 residents. And a kind of a variety of towns in there as well. And then the approved by leave reason type, got some percentages here. So the employee owned health is the highest at almost 42. And then bonding is about 30.5%. Pregnancy is about 19, and care of a family member at about 8.75. And then, as you can see, some of the other reasons here are substantially lower percentages as well. Okay, and on this slide, as of March 7th, these numbers were calculated. So we've had over 35,000 payments released as of now, and 5,299 unique employees. In some cases, the numbers would be a little bit higher there relative to the fact that the same individual would be filing a pregnancy and a bonding claim. So this is just unique individuals that have received payments on this statistic, and covering a total of almost 216,000 total days paid for over $21.6 million that have been paid out as of the 7th. And then if you take a look to your right, the benefit payments, 56% of them are at 780, and then it also goes down the range here, about 30% between 500 and 779, and about 11% between 250 to 499, and then a very small percentage that are lower. And you can see the daily average amount at a little over $100 as well, and the duration of claims here in addition to that. So about 7 weeks on the non-COVID related and about 4.9 weeks on the COVID related claims. And then going to some of the call statistics for Aflac reporting, and you can see the customer service level answered within 30 seconds, and the average handle time for a call, relatively very, very low abandonment rate of the call, and hold times, talk time, and then after call work time as well. And that concludes that portion.
Daryl, thank you so much, Daryl.
Yes, just to get a sense, when we label claims as such, does my assumption is that's a claim is an application, and I'm going to use my words wisely. The application could be incomplete or complete, and I think that's an important distinction for us. So I don't know if you have a breakdown of incomplete and completed claims to sum up that 23,849. And of the completed claims, how many resulted in approval, denial, and still pending?
So at this point, Daryl, a couple of things. That 23,000 plus number are completed claims. If the claim doesn't get through to the extent that it's a completed claim, it wouldn't be counted in the intake that way. With regard to the levels of approval and denials, I do have approved claims as of the 8th were 6,563. Denials were just over 5,000 at 5,001. The number of pending claims are a total of 10,267. There were 1,893 canceled claims as well. And that's where somebody had filed and then potentially realized for one reason or another that they elected to back out of the claim themselves. And then a total of 85 that were exhausted and 25 that were outside of effective dates as well.
Okay. So well, in those stats, the denial of 5,001 with appeal rights, due process, just on the Department of Labor side, I know we're seeing very minimal appeals. So
yes,
my assumption is the triage or professional review by the authority is absolutely working. Because if you got 5,000, and typically I think at least in unemployment, the industry standard is around 20% are appealed. So that's 1,000. And I don't even think we have, I think we're under 100.
I think you're right.
23
appeals. Yeah, right. So that's remarkable. I'm actually speechless for once. So kudos there on that review, because it works. And apparently to satisfaction. So that's fantastic.
So just to be clear about one thing that John had said, a completed application is an application that gets effectively started,
right,
as opposed to someone who kind of, either goes on the portal and doesn't finish it, or starts a phone call and then ends it. So,
right,
but I think, Daryl, you raised a good point, which is that not every application that we have received has all of the necessary documents. So there is a very large number, I think almost half of the pending claims that are pending because we're still waiting for the necessary documentation, either the identity verification, the employment verification,
right,
or the documentation substantiating the reason for leave.
Okay.
So that's it's a very large block of our pending claims, is that we're still waiting to get that documentation in.
All right, so that's important clarification. So although it's classified as a completed claim, the employee submitted it, there's potentially some missing documentation to further that application along the review process. And in that is considered a status of pending. And you got 10. So my follow-up question on the pending of 10,000 plus, how old are those? I mean, are some of those, I'm assuming, from December, and on. So at some point,
No, yeah, I'm sorry. And Molly, I do see your hand. So if you don't mind, I'll finish answering Daryl's question. Then John, please chime in. Okay, so no, this is a statistic that we probably manage almost every day with AFLAC. So the number of claims that are outstanding in December is probably 40. And those are claims that we've repeatedly asked, that I should say the number of claims that haven't been approved from December is probably 40. And those are ones where we're just continuing to ask the person or the people or the claimants to submit their data, or they've submitted it so early that their claim hasn't even come due yet. So they're just sitting in that pending. The problem, I should say the problem, but I will say, so, the problem is that we want to give people as much opportunity as possible to submit their data and their information, so that we're not denying the claim because they failed to do so. And because we know it's the beginning of the program, we really don't want to penalize people. So also, in the spirit of full transparency, the number of COVID claims that have come in has lengthened the amount of time that it has taken for AFLAC to review the pending claims that are now in the late January, I should say mid-February, late January, mid-February range. So there are, and I think we can get that number, a number of claims in that bucket where everything's complete and people are still waiting on their decision. And we've been very transparent about that. We've gone back on our website and said the number of claims that we're getting is just overwhelming. So rather than it take 5 days, it could take as long as 15. We appreciate that. And we appreciate that this is really important to you, but we're trying to work through this as quickly as we possibly can. Then those that are experiencing challenges with that time frame, they're escalating those issues to us. And John and his team work through every single one of those escalations. So whether they come through United Way or they come through a legislator, sometimes I get an email that says, I'm still waiting for a decision. It's been quite some time. My surgery's coming up. All of those are addressed when they come in, and they're addressed within 24 to 48 hours. And if a person has received their information, or if AFLAC is in fact behind, we're very transparent about that, and then giving them a time frame as to when they will be able to get a decision. So in addressing this huge, I shouldn't say huge, but in addressing the concerns that people have raised, and also in our monitoring this almost daily, AFLAC has been extraordinarily responsive. And not only have they added more team members and more time that they've been spending on working on the claims that are, we say, in good order and should have a decision made, but the volume has really made that decision window much longer than we would like. They've also now directed 6 more, really, I think, highly skilled and highly talented, and they're more deeply experienced people to really work on working through those claims that should have been in that 5-day window are now in the 10 to 15-day window. And we get those statistics almost every day to see how that window is closing and where they can get some, some real traction in getting those claims moving, because we honestly don't want people to have to be concerned about getting their benefits on time. We don't want people to be complaining about that. That's not what they're paying for. We understand that. But every state has had this experience, and some states have had months of delay. We're not trying to replicate that. And then we're learning from those states that have said to us, this is what you need to do in order to do that. So we are working through that. I think if you go on our site, you'll see we've been really transparent. There are delays, but we're doing everything we possibly can to address them. Molly, and then I think Paul.
I have a few questions, but I think they're all fast. The first is, are we publicly posting these slides anywhere? Because they're super helpful, and I was writing as fast as I could, but I think they'd be really helpful resources.
So good, yeah.
Yeah, they go up with the meeting minutes, I believe. Yeah, so you'll get.
Got it. That's great. That's super helpful. My second question was just, it looked like basically on claims submitted, it's basically half are for workers' own health needs, but on claims granted, it's more like 40%.
Mhm.
And I'm curious about what the source of that gap is. Is that
Yeah.
just like COVID claims that don't qualify? Like what's going on in that?
Yeah, so that gap is pretty much the COVID claim. So you submit the claims. I'm sorry, John, please. It's your unit. You go ahead and you know all
No,
the answers.
that's absolutely correct. I'm just nodding in agreement that that spike in COVID claims, both in January and early February, absolutely because of the fact that in many instances, a diagnosis of COVID does not rise to the level of serious health condition, those claims have been denied. So that has absolutely elevated the denial rate.
Got it. Okay, that's very helpful, and that was consistent with what we heard last month about some of that gap. So when we get into, I think some of this is that, but could you just talk more about, so of the 5,000 claims that have been actually denied, not those that are pending, particularly given the helpful clarification that incomplete documentation keeps you in pending world and not denial world, like, could you speak more to why those claims are being denied or what's going on there?
So one of the other things with respect to incomplete documentation as well is that at some point, once those documents have come due, fully due, which would be 15 days after the initial start date of your leave or filing date, whichever is later, at that point, and that customer should have been contacted as well in terms of providing any documents that were missing. At that point, there is a time at which they could make a determination that the claim is denied. And that being said, with those denials, there is also an item sent out, which is called a reconsideration request. And they have the opportunity to essentially cure the deficiencies with regard to providing us a reason as to why they did not get us those documents in a timely manner, and or to get the documents in a timely manner, either employment verification or MedCert or things of that nature that would be required to adjudicate the claim essentially. So those two areas are certainly the lion's share of the reasons for denial. And then some of which are eligibility as well. If somebody hasn't met eligibility criteria, then that would be another third significant reason for denial.
Got it. So sorry, you said the two that are lion's share are due and incomplete documentation and not sufficiently serious COVID. Is that right?
Correct.
Right, thank you. That's really helpful. And then you mentioned on the previous last month's meeting that at least initially the authority was individually following up with everyone who started a claim but didn't complete it, and also was individually reviewing each claim that's coming in. Is that still what the process is?
So with regard to the claims that have not been completed, I'm not 100% certain, in all honesty, that that is still ongoing. I think as an outreach in the initial phase of the program, that was being done to ensure that somebody's intent to drop it was the case. I'm not 100% certain that is an ongoing effort at this point.
No, it's not. So that was something that was started in the beginning, again, because we weren't sure about familiarity. But with 23,000 claims, I don't think we really have a challenge around familiarity anymore, or the lack of familiarity, I should say, with the program. So those efforts have now been redirected to moving through the pending block so that we can really get people decisions in a timely manner.
Got it. That makes sense. And I guess just I promise this is the last one. You mentioned the ways in which Aflac has responded to the claim processing time getting longer than we're looking for. Do we know what the trend is? Like, is processing time getting longer or shorter? Do we know?
So they have been making substantial efforts through the use of shifting personnel from one area to another to make more decisions and reducing the numbers of pending claims overall. So the trend has been operating in a positive direction. As the folks at Aflac, the employees, get more proficient at handling these claims as well, we anticipate that the rates of adjudication will improve as well over time. And they certainly have picked up the pace from prior time period with respect to the fact that they are more well-versed in processing these claims at this point also.
And Molly, the last thing I'll add to that is that we did, given the feedback that we had been receiving from the claims that had been escalated to us for a closer review, we've identified some areas where we think some retraining was really appropriate. So that's been happening. So that's happening this month, where they have, I think, 4 or 5 training sessions with their customer service advocates and their case managers, so that they can be better prepared and their proficiency can be higher. So that was in response to what we had been seeing, and they did schedule that, and that's happening. Paul?
Paul, yeah.
So just quickly, no discussion required, just an editorial comment and request. I don't personally find the generational breakdown to be all that illuminating. If others do find it to be helpful, could I ask that you replace Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z with claimants born from date range X to Y? Because I have no idea what separates one generation from another. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
I found it super helpful, but the years are
noted.
definitely useful too.
Yeah, we can do that. That's not a problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Anything else, Paul? Okay.
No, thank you.
Anyone else?
This is Mike. I have a quick question, and I know we're only into our 4th month, but our actuarial projections, the claims numbers, our actuaries relied on claims filed in other states with startup programs, I think Washington in particular. Do we have any sense whether or not that claims information that we're seeing is following the trend from the other states or diverting from the trends?
So at this point, Mike, the spike in January certainly was well beyond the expected number of claims. However, that being said, the balance of February and now into March as well is definitely more along the lines of what was expected, which is approximately in the range of about 7,000 per month. And that's almost what we're seeing, almost right there. So it has leveled off, certainly, now that that health crisis has subsided, and we are seeing numbers that are correlating to the actuarial guidance that we originally received.
Thank you, Jonah. Thanks for your presentation. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. I have one observation, and of course, again, sitting in my seat where it's very female focused, looking at the gender. I mean, the women were there were almost twice as many, or there were twice as many claims. And I wonder, and maybe Jessica, this is a good segue into your piece here, but I'm wondering, clearly there is something there around who's using this program and who needs it the most. No surprise, right? That's why we passed the legislation. But what are we doing? And I think that's why, going back, Walter, earlier, looking at the gender and industry breakdowns of those businesses, I think could be really telling in terms of outreach. And I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that. Otherwise, we can just move on to Jessica. Okay. Jessica, you are up. The registration and the contribution portal and outreach and engagement updates.
Thank you, Fran. All right. So to your point, Fran, I wanted to swap out this this picture for this month's presentation. This is actually, sorry, let me just put it into full screen mode for you. This was from our small business when we were building the small business webpage. So this is actually an individual employee at a restaurant here in my hometown of Waterford. So it's a nice segue to your point about who's using the program. In terms of our program metric updates, we currently, as you heard Andrea mention, have 130,683 businesses registered, which is an increase of just over 1,800. We have 581 TPAs registered. That's an increase of 44. And over 395,400,000 contributions received or in transit as of March 8th. On the private plan front, we have 529 approved private plans, which is an increase of 44. And that represents about 39,000 workers covered by those private plans, which is an increase of 1,500. In terms of our Contact Us Center, 259 open inquiries right now, 394 inquiries created in the past month and 466 closed. And that brings our total since inception to over 30,000 inquiries. And lastly, the number of workers covered by the Connecticut Paid Leave Program is at about 1.6 million. Our contribution and employer registration portal updates for February and March. We continue with production support, the soft launch of the amended return processing with ADP. We have begun working with a software product vendor called Cloud Collect for the collections efforts. We are reviewing and responding to the results of the TRICOM security assessment. We have added a button to easily access our podcasts to our website and providing private plan data for actuaries. On the benefit and claims administration, we are prioritizing our day 2 enhancements to the claims process with AFLAC and integrating the customer appointment scheduling tool for the Connecticut Paid Leave Benefits team, where folks will be able to go on and schedule an appointment directly. Moving on to outreach and engagement updates. Wanted to show a quick snapshot of our 3-month website visits. So you can see dark blue bar is December, light blue is January, and green is February. You can see we saw a spike in all of the metrics that we are looking at here in January, not unexpected in the first month of payments. Just a lot of interest in people going to our website to find out more, but you can see that in February, our usage remained high. And over this 3-month period, the top pages in all 3 months that folks were visiting were the For Claims page and the employee landing page. Again, not surprising there. In terms of our media coverage, we've had some great coverage in the past month. An op-ed by Andrea was featured in Connecticut News Junkie. The title, Paid Leave is an Essential Tool in Addressing Connecticut's Wealth Gap. There also was an article last week in the Connecticut Post by Ken Dixon on the utilization rates that we've seen thus far. On the radio front, we've had a number of interviews, including WYBC in New Haven, where Andrea was on with Juan Castillo. I'm sorry, that date is wrong. It wasn't February 1st. It was more towards the middle of the month. I apologize for that. We also had Andrea on WTIC AM with Brian Schatzman, on with JC and Macaulay on allaccess.org, and a big thank you to Ava for representing us on WRYM, which is a Spanish radio station. She did that interview on Tuesday. And then lastly, Andrea was featured on the iHeartRadio Connecticut stations. There are 4 of them. They had a special feature on International Women's Day, and they featured, I think it was 5 different women who are making an impact in our state, and Andrea was one of those chosen to be represented. So if you haven't had a chance to listen, I'm going to send out the link. You can see this on all of their Facebook pages and hear her segment. Wanted to mention, as most of you I'm sure know, earlier this week was International Women's Day on Tuesday, and I just wanted to make you aware of a social media campaign that we did that day. This was Jacqueline's brainchild, and she did an enormous amount of work in putting together content. We featured women who are leading the paid leave movements in their communities throughout the day, and we did posts from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., culminating with the large one that you see here, featuring the female leaders in our own state that made this possible. So if you have a chance to go to our page and check it out, it was a fabulous idea. We tagged people in different states. We had folks from all over the country liking and sharing, which was really wonderful.
It was great. I saw it. Very good. Very, very exciting.
And I give all the credit to Jacqueline. She, as I said, she really did so much work on that. In terms of just our social media metrics overall, you can see our Facebook and Instagram reach have gone up pretty substantially in February. Some of that is attributed just to more compelling content that we're putting out there more frequently. And then some of it is also the result of our paid social media campaigns that we are currently running, both to reach businesses and to reach consumers. A quick update on our Google AdWords campaign, which launched in February. We had 1.28 million impressions, generating 17,000 clicks. I know that might not seem like a lot of clicks for the number of impressions, but trust me, that is actually a very good click-through rate, especially when you're talking about a program like ours that is not necessarily, a retail or something like that, that's really you know, something people are searching for very frequently. They're searching for us when they need us. The top words that generated those clicks were CT paid leave, which is a great indicator that everything we're doing in terms of outreach to brand our program name is sticking with people, followed by paid family medical leave, and then paid leave. Another digital tactic I wanted to provide an update on, we just started this in February. We are geofencing around 41 hospitals and community health centers around the state. If you're not familiar with geofencing, it is essentially drawing a virtual boundary around a specific area. And when someone enters that area with their phone or their mobile device, if they have their location services enabled, we are able to sort of tag that individual's device and then deliver ads to them. So we thought this would be a good tactic, not only to reach the individuals who are seeking care at these facilities, but also the doctors, nurses, administrators, other healthcare professionals who we want to be aware of our program so that they can help spread the word to those patients. And we had over nearly 386 million impressions delivered in February. And as you can see, we have pretty good spread throughout the state, trying to reach all of the major hospitals, especially throughout the state. We have launched a small business pilot program in coordination with CBIA and WBDC. This is where we are starting with a small group of businesses who have indicated that they would like to be paired with a Connecticut paid leave business advisor so that they have a direct line of communication for help with claims. We had our 4 business advisors, I think to their chagrin in some cases, but they were good sports about it. They recorded an introductory video, which was sent to each individual person so that that person could not only have their name and email, but also put their face with it as well. So we really wanted them to know that there is a real live person on the other end of that email or phone call that's there to help them. And that's been really well received. We have, when I put this together yesterday, it was nearly 30, but I've gotten some additional emails already this morning. So over 30 businesses that have opted in to participate in that. And then the Paid Leave podcast, as you have heard, Nancy's been working really hard on that. Her second episode with Governor Lamont was released on 2/21. She is releasing episodes twice per month. So if you'd like to mark your calendars, there will be another coming out next Monday, and then the 4th episode on 3/28. And the podcasts have had nearly 200 downloads in just over 1 month, which is fantastic for something that's an absolutely brand new product that we're trying to get the word out about. So if you haven't had a chance to listen, please do. And if you would be so inclined to share with your networks, we would love that as well. And then from there, I'm going to turn it over to Jacqueline. If I could, I just incorporated her slides into this presentation so that she can talk about her legislative outreach.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jessica. So the legislature is happening in full swing. Lots of public hearings are going on right now. So we are very lucky to be able to connect with these legislators before they become extremely busy. So we had a really good Valentine's Day week, I'll say, with Representative Ann Hughes, Senator Will Haskell, and Representative Gilchrist. We did it by Zoom, and then we uploaded it to Facebook. They put it on their Facebook pages and tagged us so that we were getting some play on that as well. And March 2nd, we did one with Representative Stephanie Thomas. So we don't have any planned coming up just because it's going to be pretty intense for them these next, oh gosh, it ends May 4th. I don't know how much, it's not much time left. So 2 months left. So hopefully during the summer, we can do more with them. On the 22nd, we did a meeting with Delaware State Senator Sarah McBride. Andrea was great in terms of answering her questions and helping her to navigate a little bit on the legislation and getting paid leaves stood up in Delaware. They passed it in the state Senate yesterday. So that's great news and very excited for her. She's been doing a lot of negotiating. And we did presentations to the Metal Trades Council. They work primarily at Electric Boat and had some very specific questions. And that was March 3rd. And it was a great meeting to help them to navigate the process and how to work with it. And on the 8th, we had a presentation with CSEA. It appears a lot of unions are starting to become interested in participating in paid leave. As many of you probably know, there's, unions have to bargain in to participate in the program, and there's some conversations. And so they wanted to find out more about it and everything to bring back to members. On February 24th, I sent out my first legislator newsletter. So that was fun to put together. I just mostly highlighted, and I realized I probably should put the board on that. I don't want to clutter anybody's inboxes. So if you're interested in receiving it, I can include you on the send out list, the mailing list, so you can see what we're sending out. But a lot of it is the messaging and highlines of what we need people to know, especially if they're getting constituent calls, and what may be impacting their offices, and resources that they and their staff can have so that they can quickly help their constituents. I was surprised how high the open rate was. It was 34.3%. That may sound low to a lot of people, but usually 10 to 15% is like average opening. So, we were really excited to see people are opening it and reading it. The click-through rate wasn't as high, but I think that they were able to skim through and see the information and they needed to know. And it serves as a resource. So it's something they can go back to look at for, future questions or anything that's coming through. And a lot of the work that we're doing, when we first started, we did the caucus, presentations and everything, and it generated a lot of constituent inquiries, which there was a surge of that. And I think it's also reflected with the Omicron variant and the increase in claims. Those have settled out now. We're not getting as many inquiries as we were before. So I'm sure John and Kathy are happy about that. And then Jess, you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. I just wanted to bring back my map. There's not actually much changing, I'll say, in terms of the coloration in the towns. I will put the link in the chat, which I don't want to lose my screen at the moment, so I'll do that after the presentation's down. But this month, what was exciting was now every single town has a claim in. Union was the last holdout, but this is in Canaan. I don't know what's going on there. They remain top of the list, and I think Jess, if you move to the next slide, and John touched on this about the per capita. These are very similar towns to what we saw last month as well. I think these are all actually Hampton, I think may have moved up in Voluntown, but these are very similar. And I also just put together so that you could see the top, just where the largest number of claims are coming from, not based on per capita, just usage. And I think that's the next slide. I think just, there it is, yes. So New Haven, my hometown, is top of the list. And you can see that, the cities are Maine, a lot of them coming there, but Hamden it's very interesting to see Hamden coming in there as well. So what's nice I find is that what we're doing is getting out all over the state. It's really, and that's, I think, a hard thing to do. And Jess and Nancy are doing an amazing job with the outreach. And our team is so responsive, so that it's been really great. So I look at geography just particularly for our legislators to keep track of all that stuff. And Jess, you could stop sharing it if and just in terms of legislation, I just realized I forgot to mention that there really isn't much that's directly affecting us at the legislature. There's actually not really anything. We are keeping our eyes on two bills, that may, possibly if there's something in there, but it's not like a direct paid leave impact at all. It's just when doing this, you're always trying to remain on watch because you don't know what turns into what. So they always say it's, sausage being made, but we are in the hearing process JF deadlines start to hit in 2 weeks. I can't remember what the date is right now, but so you'll start seeing things moving a little bit more then. And I think that's it. I don't know if anybody has questions for me or Jess. Oh, and let me put my link. I'll put the link in the box now.
Excellent, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I love the map, Jacqueline.
And for the map, what I'm gonna do is each month, I'm just generating a new link so that if we need to compare months, that we're able to do that. So
Thank you.
There.
So it's just made for time's sake, it's 10 minutes of 11, right? We have 10 minutes left and we still have a number of items to get through. Does anybody have any questions for either Jessica or Jacqueline? Okay, excellent presentations. Thank you so much. So much progress being made. We'll go to the committee reports and Daryl, the Policy and Personnel Committee. Do you have anything that you'd like to report?
Thank you, Fran. Yes, we met on Tuesday, March 1. We talked about proposed policies, the private plan audit, and Andrea touched on old business for wage adjustments. Very robust discussion, including the members. So very, very good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions for Daryl? Okay. Thank you, Daryl. Outreach and engagement, Molly.
Thanks. The committee met last month. I think Jessica and Jacqueline between them have covered most of what we talked about. So unless there's any questions for them, I think we can move on in the interest of time.
Great. Any questions, anyone? All right. Paul, finance and audit.
Yes, in the interest of time, I'm going to promptly turn it over to David so he can run through the financial reports for the authority.
Thank you.
You're muted, Dave.
Let's try that again. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start off with the month of January. So in the month of January, the authority spent $1.1 million. We are still currently ahead of budget for the quarter by $2.8 million. Spending for the month of January was in the typical categories, $388,000 for compensation and related items, $389,000 for our portion of the appeals administration build, $125,000 for the contact center, $75,000 for licenses, and $49,000 for some spending on the employee contribution system. Those are the items that made up most of the $1.1 million we spent in January. Cumulatively, to date, the authority has spent almost $21 million, $7.9 million of that in the current fiscal year. We are ahead of budget cumulatively by over $18 million. And again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the numbers specifically, but the categories of the spending are the ones that we've discussed in the past. Salaries, the employee contribution system, the claims and benefits system, support teams, post-production support, and outreach are the categories that we have spent our money on. In terms of bond funds, in the month of January, like I mentioned, most of the spending happened for our portion of the appeals administration system. We've currently spent about $10.5 million of bond funds. We have about another $600,000 earmarked or that we know we're going to spend, leaving about $1.1 million left available to the authority. So in total, we've spent or we will spend over $11 million of bond funds thus far. Moving on to contributions in the month of January, that was the month after a quarter end. So we did get a lot of the contributions in, about $92.8 million. We also made $1.3 million of benefit payments, $1.9 million to AFLAC for their administration of benefits. That number looks to be about the number we'll be going forward on a monthly basis. We also paid our quarterly administration fee to the authority as budgeted of just over $4.1 million and continued making our monthly seed repayment of $319,000. Moving on to, oh, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Cumulatively to date, the authority has received over $394 million of contributions through the month of January. As Jess mentioned before, to date through the 8th, that amount has bumped up to $395.4 million. Benefit payments, including the $20 million deposit into the impressed account that we had to make to AFLAC, has been $21 million. And that leaves the fund at the end of January with over $353.5 million. We are ahead of where we thought we would be for budget to date in that regard. Quick preview for February. We spent about $1.5 million on our operating expenses, typical categories of expenses, maintenance and support, employee salary and benefits, and the like. For the month of February, we did make over $11.5 million of claim benefits. Again, the usual $1.9 million for the AFLAC administration fee and $318,000 for seed repayment. As far as where we think we're going to be by the end of the year, we expect to be at $13.6 million for our operating budget, compared to our operating budget of just over $15 million. That's a $1.4 million positive variance. That's about where we reported last month. Some items went up, some went down, but really nothing major. So that's where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. And as far as where we think we're going to be in terms of our contribution budget by June 2022, the end of the fiscal year, we expect to be at about $227.8 million. That's a little lower than reported last month because of lower contributions than we expected. The claims benefit number that we're projecting is based on the actuarial assumption. We're still in the early stages of claim benefits. So once we get through all the claims that we still have to process and we get more on a regular cadence and trends, we can update that number as need be. But we're using that for now until we get some more actual data. Does anybody have any questions on our financial results? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Looks good. All right. Thank you, everyone. Andrea, your CEO report.
Thank you, Fran. The only thing I have to report is that it is that time of year again. We need to remind the board that everyone has to file their statement of financial interests. Erin will be sending you specific instructions and reminders and links to make that easy for you. And I think they're due on May 1st, Erin, is that correct? They're due on May 1st. Last year we had 100% compliance, so we'll try it again.
We will do it again. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Is there any old business? Anyone? Any new business? All right, moving right along. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Daryl.
Second, Molly.
Thank you, Molly. Any opposed?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hey, I wrote that down this time so I wouldn't forget. All right. Thanks, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. Have a wonderful rest of the week and weekend. Thank you, everyone. Great job to the team and to leadership. Thank you so much. Excellent.
Thank you, Fran, for getting us out right on time.
You're welcome. All right. It is exactly 11 o'clock. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.